So I just want to say we're in transition right now. This is not currently my position, but I am on the team to help. So I know that you all might have several questions, and I'm going to work with accountability and with instructional services to help you all get through those questions with the assessment for CogAT. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background about CogAT. You don't have to remember all of these pieces, but the reason we try to provide you an overview context is that a lot of people have questions. You know, parents might ask you questions about testing in general. Those letters that have gone home, has everybody's letter gone home to opt out? Yes? So parents might be asking you questions and you're like, I don't know what to say. So I want to give you some information and some language to help you with that and to help you feel better about what it is we're assessing and what do we kind of do with that information. The second part of that you won't have to worry about. When the scores come back, your AIG coordinator or curriculum coordinator is the one that will usually handle that. We want to try to get you up to that point. So I want to start off with terminology. So this is a little different in your world. We call this a screening and not a test. And why do we call it a screening? Is because we are trying to determine students' eligibility for a service. It is not about academic achievement. It is not about how successful that they are in school. In fact, we always get the questions from parents, how can my child improve their score on the test? Well, we don't, or how do they study for this test? Well, this is not a test first, and it's really about seeing where they are currently to see what services and supports we need to provide them. Not about how much we want them to study to be successful, because that's not what this is about. And this is what we call an aptitude assessment. So we want to measure students' capabilities or capacity for learning as it relates to three areas: verbal, nonverbal, and verbal, nonverbal, and quantitative reasoning. I was like, what's the third one? And so we are not measuring how well they understand math or can solve math problems. We are not measuring how well they read. In fact, this is going to shock you. They don't have to be able to read to do well on this assessment. So I want to tell you that up front now, because you might find some students who really are great problem solvers who might not know how to read, but do extremely well on this assessment. So I just want to let you know that out the gate. Let's talk a little bit about the process timeline for 2nd and 5th grade. So the original administration window will occur September 28th through October 2nd. There is not flexibility with that assessment window. And why is that? Because we are providing this assessment district-wide, we don't want some schools getting it one day and having access to information, possibility of sharing, people saying there's an unfair advantage. So that is our original screening window, September 28th through October 2nd. The makeup window will be on October 9th. And we do that for manageability and also fairness. Scores are expected to be released on November 6th at 8:30. So I think you already have a training, date on the 6th. You are welcome and encouraged to come, but your curriculum coordinator or your AIG coordinator should also be at that meeting, because at that particular session will be more about what's communication to parents going to look like, what are next steps in the process, what kind of paperwork or information needs to be completed. So you'll need to know that kind of for information's sake, but that part will be mostly for them. Following that, any child that scores at the 75th percentile, and I didn't give y'all that, but I'll leave it with Nora Ann. So you'll know, well, what do these scores kind of mean? The lowest score a student can score on the CogAT and be eligible to take the ITBS, which is the achievement assessment, is the 75th percentile. So with the 75th percentile, if they make the 95th percentile on the ITBS, they're eligible for some level of service for AG. So that's why we use that number. We don't just throw it out of a hat. They really can be combined with the other assessments we use for AG. We use two different versions for 2nd and 5th, and you'll learn that very quickly. The 2nd grade assessment is consumable. meaning every child writes in that book, we can no longer use that book. It has to be pulled apart to score, to give us information. For the 5th grade book, it's just like with EOGs. We reuse their books over and over, and we just order new answer sheets. So because of that, we didn't move to the new assessment for 5th grade, but we've moved to the newest one for 2nd, because they charge you more money if you don't go to the new assessment. Go figure. The ITBS will be shipped in December, and we expect our scores to be returned in February for the 2nd round. Rescreenings will occur in February, March, late February, March, after we've released the scores. And then schools will have all their rosters of students who are eligible for AG in order to make their summer classes for the following year by the end of April. We do that because we assess so many 2nd graders, and for schools that have really large populations, if we don't give them that information in advance, it really makes it hard to schedule classes for the next year. Any questions about that 2nd grade timeline so far?
I think we had on our original calendars that ITBS would start on November 16th, and you've got the 17th.
So that has been adjusted. Okay. Because when we give back the scores for ITBS on the 6th, we got to allow a little bit of time to get that communication to parents, allow them to opt out.
So the 17th
and the
correct.
Practice test. The 17th is correct.
Okay.
Good catch, though, because I forgot about that. For 5th grade, you received information about students eligible to be screened for 5th grade. And that was based on their EOG scores from 4th grade. So any student who scored at the 85th percentile on the reading or the math EOG is eligible to take the CogAT. And of course their parents have the option to opt out. So let me talk about a couple different scenarios and what does that mean. Some of those students are already eligible for AG, and that's absolutely okay. We originally screened students in 5th grade to see if they need a change in service. So do they need to go from AG to HAG? So over time, have some of their capabilities and achievements increase and they need a change in service or a different level of service to support the academic growth. For students who are already HAG, no matter if they're at Meadowlark or Brunson, those students should not be rescreened. There is no new layer of service that we have to offer them. The student at Meadowlark and the student at Brunson both are eligible to go to Haynes. So I know you have labels for some of those students, but if they already qualify for HAG, you should not rescreen them. I know you're going to have some of those parents who will say, I want my child rescreened. Guess what we have for those? They can always get a private evaluation. If they just want to say, hey, where's Susie right now? But we're not rescreening students because once they're eligible for AG or HAG, they are always eligible unless they leave the district for more than 12 months or they have really poor performance over, say, 2 years. Yes.
My AG coordinator said some tested over the summer.
Okay.
Do they take this or does that count?
So you will need to check to see who screened over the summer. If they screened and they're a current 5th grader, they shouldn't be rescreened again. That was a good question, though. Other questions about 5th grade? Yes, ma'am.
We have one kid that was tested in 4th grade. My CC said to ask about this. Are they exempt from being screened this year?
So that I will leave up to the school, but let me tell you how it usually works, and then you can go from there. So we screen every student 2nd grade. They get a full round assessment. If they make the 75th, they go to ITBS. If they're not eligible, then they get one rescreen. In 3rd or 4th grade, if they meet the 85th percentile threshold, they could be eligible for one of the Saturday screenings.
Okay.
The trick with that student would be to see did they get assessed in 3rd and 4th. If they only got one assessment, I would say they were still eligible for the 5th grade round. Does that make sense? Okay. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
On the first bullet point regarding the who is eligible for 5th grade, last year I know we received a list. Will we receive that again?
So I think Dana did she print I know you have the labels. So those students on your labels are technically your list, but did Dana also print a list too?
It's on the portal.
Yes, on the website.
Oh,
Okay.
there you go. I knew it was somewhere. I just know Dana did it. So, all right. There's the answer to that question. Other questions? Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit, and I said some of this. This is an ability measure, and we use the CogAT versus other assessments because it is known to have a very strong verbal component, nonverbal component as compared to other assessments. To measure some of those nonverbal components, that means you don't have to use language. It's usually matrices, figures, pictures for them to process and problem solve. And CogAT has one of the best reputations of being able to do that without words. It's used for identification in most North Carolina districts. We are the only North Carolina district other than Charlotte that does it in second grade. Why? Because it's insanely expensive. But we do it because we assess the students in second to begin placement in third. So that's why we do it. So with the CogAT, IQ versus aptitude, they're a little bit different. So for the CogAT, we're only looking at those cognitive processes that are most closely linked to academic success within schools. Whereas intelligence tests, they are looking at a broader spectrum of abilities. So a lot of people ask, my child's IQ is this, and they performed X on the CogAT. Well, that could very well be true because we are not measuring the same pieces of information you would get with an IQ assessment. We can't because IQ assessments are done one-on-one. The CogAT is a group measure. And we do it as a group measure because we want to be able to pull out pieces of information about students and their capabilities that we couldn't get because we don't have the time to be able to measure students one-on-one. I just told you there are 3 components of or sub-areas of the assessment: verbal, nonverbal, and quantitative. And each one of those will be administered on a different day. We do that because for second graders, remember, they've never had a lot of assessment practice, if you will, other than what they get with Dibbles and K2 math. They have no other frame of reference for assessments. We want to provide them time to process through this assessment. And Nora Ann will talk a little bit about accommodations, but I will mention this briefly. For second grade, most accommodations are acceptable. There are very few that are not acceptable. And why is that? The assessment is completely done in pictures, and so there are no words, technically, and it's also read aloud. All the directions are read aloud. They can get multiple test sessions. So you can break down the increments of time, and they can take as long as they need, with the exception you can't go past a school day. So there are a lot of pieces that are already built in that do not impact the validity of the assessment that can be used on a second grader. So you should feel really good about that. A lot of people get very concerned about that. Is the only thing that I would say, need to be very considerate about is how you group those students. So if a student has tests for 20 minutes and a 5-minute break, you probably wouldn't want to put them in a regular classroom because they're going to need continuous breaks. So you'll need to think about how you break down your mod groups based on those modifications, even though there is no technical time limit. So that's more of a planning piece than can we do this. Does that make sense? Yes? Okay.
But if they are a small group, we still have to provide that with this test.
So if that is what their modification says, small group up to 5, you'll need to figure out how you plan for a small group up to 5 because that meets their accommodation expectation, right? But you can also create small groups for kids who don't get small groups. So if you have a kid that might have, they've not been formally identified, but they might cause some behavioral disruptions, you might need to do a group of 4 with them. If you have a proctor and you have an administrator, there is no rule that says you can't do that for kids. Does that make sense? But you must follow the student's IEP. And because, again, there is no reading involved, there is no issue with read aloud. Okay? Now, when we get to ITBS, that will be different. But right now, we're not measuring reading as a construct that's being assessed. That's not an issue. Other questions? I know that's just a little bit about accommodations. We're going to come back to that. So somewhere here, you don't need it right now, but there's an overview of the CogAT. I'm giving you the brief base, but if you want to know kind of some of the things that are known for the CogAT, how well it's tested among subgroups, that article gives you the context and background for that. And it's called Cognitively Speaking, and it's written by Dr. David Lohman, who is the author or developer of the CogAT. We use level 8, form 7, and the reason we moved to that assessment were a couple different reasons. One, it's completely in color, so it's actually depicting what kids normally see and how they see pictures and things that they would have to solve and process through. It also is aligned to the other assessments. So remember I told you for 5th grade they took version 6. So the CogAT form 7 is aligned to assess the same items or the same types of items that the 5th graders get assessed with. And this is probably the best view to show you what that looks like. And I think it's a picture in this PowerPoint. If you look at form 7 versus levels 9 and above, they measure the exact same components with the verbal, nonverbal, and quantitative and the subtests within it. One set is just done in pictures and the other has words and they actually solve the problems. So very, very similar. Also, some of the other features that were added in is its fairness for various groups, low-income students, second language learners. It was assessed, and one of the things that we've definitely, I think, seen a pattern with is an increase in identification in our underrepresented subgroups since we've implemented this assessment. As you know, we've had a new HAG site, and that happened when we moved to this assessment. That pattern was very similar last year. If I had to be a betting person, it's probably going to happen again this year. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so our kids who can test in their native language,
Mm-hmm.
how do we handle that when I don't have a native language administrator?
So hold on to that for a second, and I'm going to go to that in a minute. I think that's right after that. But any other questions about this, and then I promise I'm coming back to that. Okay, so as I mentioned before, all the subtests are in pictures. There is a Spanish version available. So with the CogAT, if you have in your list, and David has already given you those?
He told me last week it was coming, but I haven't seen it.
Fisher gave them to us.
Who did?
Clarissa Fisher. She's usually got an EC, but that's who gave us our list.
David sent it.
Now tell me the list that you received. Who?
The list of students who are eligible to test in their native language.
Okay. So, well then that's good. Let me ask some follow-up questions. Is that a long list or short list? Give me some. Okay, it should be a short list. I'm just making sure. So the way we, and did y'all get the chart?
Yes.
Okay. So the way we determine if students are eligible to take the assessment in their native language are, one, how long they've been in the country, if it's less than a year, if their access score is greater than 5, or less than 5, sorry, their access score is less than 5, and also some of our bilingual programs get the eligibility for language selection choice. So what does that look like? So there are a couple ways you can handle who helps me with that. You can reach out to David and the ESL department. Usually Anna Ortiz is the person that helps us from the district level to administer in Spanish. If you have someone on your staff who speaks fluent Spanish, they can also administer. So I'm going to talk from 2 different links on that. So if a child is selecting or a parent is selecting Spanish as the language, you can assess that student during this testing window. You just need to have an administrator who can speak in Spanish, okay? You find that either through your school if you have a bilingual program, or you work with David Sisk and Anna Ortiz in the ESL department. It is the exact same assessment. You just need the Spanish administrator's manual to be able to administer that assessment to the student. Does that make sense? So the easy way to handle that for Spanish is the fact you use the same assessment. Now, if somebody wants Cambodian as their native language, there is no CogAT in Cambodian. So what we do with that is we work with psych services. They cannot be assessed during this window. We don't have, one, we might have to order the assessment. We got to figure out what assessment can be given in that language. But what you will need to do is communicate that to Amy Neal. And she will work with psychological services to get that student assessed at some point this year. Okay? So the parent's job will just be to determine, do I want my child to assess in this language? Our job as a district is to determine what assessment is appropriate. Psychological services does that for us. Okay? Does that make sense? So don't get that in your mind, oh my gosh, I got to get them assessed by October 2nd. That's not possible. Because we have to go through the process of, one, knowing what language they need, and psych services determine the appropriate assessment. The goal is just to get that done by the end of the year, because remember we said we assess in second to serve in third. And they will determine what aptitude assessment that should be. Is everybody kind of clear on that? Any questions about that? Lep Accommodations Guidelines, and I wish I would have put that a chart in there. You should have a list in the flow chart. It shows, and I don't think I have it on my USB, what accommodations they're eligible for, and I don't want to make them up because I don't remember them off the top of my head. Anybody have that flow chart printed here? No. I was hoping somebody did. That's okay. But y'all do have access. Have y'all seen it?
Yes.
You have seen it? Yeah. You got one? It's on the website?
I think it was part of, I can look and see if it was part of the email.
Oh, awesome. Nora Ann was so prepared. I was not thinking about that. Okay, so with the accommodations for LEP students, students can have the following accommodations. If they've scored less than 5 on the access assessment, or if they're an LEP student and their scores are between 4 and 5 on the reading subtest of access, the most recent access, here are the following accommodations they get access to. English and native language, word-to-word bilingual dictionary, electronic translator. Again, we are not assessing language for this, so that is appropriate. Multiple testing sessions, but any student in second grade gets access to that. Extended time, testing in a separate room, student reads test aloud to self. So 4 of those any student could get, okay? The only difference is the English-Spanish translator device piece. Questions on that? Thank you. So here's some other support documents, and I'm going to leave these with Nora and Annie. Y'all can pick them up later, that you have to help you. The opt-out letters, you should have already gotten those, and those are on the web portal, so you're good on those. The second language preference letter, you should have also received that as well. Overview of the AG and HAG programs. It looks like this. It just says a brief overview of programs, and there's the English, and then there's the Spanish version. I always tell people to have this handy, because you're going to get the question or the parent phone call that says, what is the AG program? It's on our website. But if a parent came in and talked to you, that is an appropriate piece you can give them without feeling like you have to be able to respond and tell them about the program. You can always direct them to Amy Neal, and as a last resort, me, if I can help. I'm happy to help. Identification pathways, I will leave that too. It's in a little green folder. It just basically shows you all the ways a student can certify for the gifted program. And it's basically numbers. So it's all about numbers. We don't do recommendations in our district, unfortunately. We don't have alternative measures. What it is based on the scores they get, either CogAT and or combined with ITBS, which is an achievement assessment. For CogAT, those students who score at the 95th percentile automatically qualify for AG in reading and math. For every other level or other ways that they qualify, they need both the CogAT and ITBS. Yes, ma'am.
I go back real quick. It dawned on me about the ones that I got the email that
Uh-huh.
Is there something where like their parents might want to opt out and they want them to take it in English?
Absolutely. It allows you,
Okay.
yeah. But if they don't submit anything back, your default is always English.
Okay.
So if they don't give you anything, the default is English.
Okay.
Now, if you have like a homeschool coordinator or parent involvement coordinator who wants to directly communicate with parents and help them understand that, that's absolutely appropriate. If you need the ESL department to help with that, that's fine too. Other questions? Other things, test items, you got an example of the test items. I thought we had the flow chart, but you have it on the portal. And the parent letter for the results, I have a copy if you want to see that, what they will get after the results come back, just so you'll know the information that they will see. And here's who you need to contact. If you have questions about AG, definitely contact Amy Neal. If it's more of a procedural process question, you probably want to email me, just because I've done this for quite a while. But if you have just general questions about the gifted program, feel free to email Amy. And I know a lot of questions you'll probably send to Nora Ann, and I appreciate if she has a question about it, she'll just forward it to me, and that works too. Keep doing that.
So day of testing, or days of testing, you or...
So I say Nora Ann is the first point of contact, and then she will forward anything that kind of needs to funnel through me. But if you have a panic situation that you feel like you don't know if Nora Ann's going to know it, you could send it to both of us. And I try my best to be as responsive as possible and get back to you. Last thing I wanted to mention. So you have the practice assessments that are with your packets. That's only a small portion of what's available. The other practice activities are available on the school district website, and they are free, and teachers can use these at any point. They are not restricted. That's one of the great things about the CogAT. They want to make it fair for all groups, and they want to make sure that students have access and exposure to these types of items before they see it on the actual assessment. And so if you go to the district homepage and go to the departments academically gifted, you must sign in at the top like you do to get access to kind of internal restricted information. But once you sign in and you're on that web page, you will see the practice activities on the left. Teachers have that same access. Anybody can use those. They can use them today if you wanted to. I think that's it for me. What questions do you have?